of what was due to the dignity of great organs. By chance a tremendous local football match, Knype versus Bursley, fell on the very Saturday of the procession. The rival arrangements for the reporting of the match were as tremendous as the match itself, and somehow the match seemed to add keenness to the journalistic struggle, especially as the Daily favoured Bursley, and the Signal was therefore forced to favour Knype. By all the laws of hazard, there ought to have been a hitch on that historic Saturday. Telephone or telegraph ought to have broken down, or rain ought to have made play impossible. But no hitch occurred, and at 5:30 o'clock of a glorious afternoon in earliest November, the Daily went to press with a truly brilliant account of the manner in which Bursley, for the first and last time in its history, had defeated Knype by 1-0. Mr. Myson was proud. Mr. Myson defied the Signal to beat his descriptive report. As for the Signal's procession, well, Mr. Myson and the chief sub-editor of the Daily glanced at each other and smiled. And a few minutes later the Daily boys were rushing out of the publishing room with bundles of papers, assuredly in advance of the Signal. It was at this juncture that the unexpected began to occur to the Daily boys. The publishing door of the Daily opened into Stanway Rents, a narrow alley in a maze of mean streets behind Crown Square. In Stanway Rents was a small warehouse, in which, according to rumours of the afternoon, a free soup kitchen was to be opened, and just before the football edition of the Daily came off the Marinoni, it emphatically was opened, and there issued from its inviting gate an odour, not, to be sure, of soup, but of toasted cheese and hot jam. Such an odour as had never before tempted the nostrils of a Daily boy, a unique and omnipotent odour. Several boys, who, I may state frankly, were traitors to the Daily cause, spies and mischief-makers from elsewhere, raced unhesitatingly in, crying that toasted cheese sandwiches and jam tarts were to be distributed like lightning to all authentic newspaper lads. The entire gang followed, scores, over 100, inwardly expecting to emerge instantly with teeth fully employed, followed like a sheep into a fold. And the gate was shut. Toasted cheese and hot jammy pastry were faithfully served to the ragged host, but with no breathless haste, and when, loaded, the boys struggled to depart, they were instructed by the kind philanthropist who had fed them to depart by another exit, and they discovered themselves in an enclosed yard, of which the double doors were apparently unyielding, and the warehouse door was shut also. And as the cheese and jam disappeared, shouts of fury arose on the air. The yard was so close to the offices of the Daily that the chimney-pots of those offices could actually be seen. And yet the shouting brought no answer from the lords of the Daily, congratulating themselves up there on their fine account of the football match, and on their celerity in going to press, and on the loyalty of their brigade. The Signal, it need not be said, disavowed complicity in this extraordinary entrapping of the Daily brigade by means of an odour. Could it be held responsible for the excesses of its disinterested sympathisers? Still, the appalling trick showed the high temperature to which blood had risen in the genial battle between great rival organs. Persons in the inmost ring whispered that Denry Machin had at length been bested on this critically important day. 4. Snape's Circus used to be one of the great shining institutions of North Staffordshire, trailing its magnificence on sculptured wheels from town to town, and occupying the dreams of boys from one generation to another. Its headquarters were at Axe, in the moorlands, 10 miles away from Hanbridge, but the riches of old Snape had chiefly come from the Five Towns. At the time of the struggle between the Signal and the Daily, its decline had already begun. The aged proprietor had recently died, and the name and the horses and the chariots and the carefully repaired tents had been sold to strangers. On the Saturday of the anniversary and the football match, which was also Martinmas Saturday, the circus was set up at Oldcastle, on the edge of the Five Towns, and was giving its final performances of the season. Even boys will not go to circuses in the middle of a Five Towns winter. The Signal people had hired the processional portion of Snape's for the late afternoon and early evening, and the instructions were that the entire cortège should be round about the signal offices in marching order not later than 5 o'clock. But at 4 o'clock several gentlemen with rosettes in their buttonholes and signal posters in their hands arrived important and panting at the fair ground of Oldcastle, and announced that the programme had been altered at the last moment in order to defeat certain feared machinations of the unscrupulous Daily. The cavalcade was to be split into 3 groups, one of which, the chief, was to enter Hanbridge by a back road, and the other 2 were to go to Bursley and Longshaw respectively. In this manner the forces of advertisement would be distributed, and the chief parts of the district equally honoured. The special linen banners, pennons, and ribbons bearing the words "Signal, 35th Anniversary," etc., had already been hung and planted and draped around the gilded summits of the chariots, and after some delay the processions were started, separating at the bottom of the cattle market. The head of the Hanbridge part of the procession consisted of an enormous car of Jupiter, with 6 wheels and 36 paregorical figures, as the clown used to say, and drawn by 6 piebald steeds guided by white reins. This coach had a windowed interior. At the greater fairs it sometimes served as a box office. And in the interior one of the delegates of the Signal had fixed himself. From it he directed the paths of the procession. It would be futile longer to conceal that the delegate of the Signal in the bowels of the car of Jupiter was not honestly a delegate of the Signal at all. He was indeed Denry Machin, and none other. From this single fact it will be seen to what extent the representative of great organs had forgotten what was due to their dignity and to public decency. Ensconced in his lair, Denry directed the main portion of the Signal's advertising procession by all manner of discreet lanes round the skirts of Hanbridge and so into the town from the hilly side, and ultimately the 10 vehicles halted in Crapper Street, to the joy of the simple inhabitants. Denry emerged and wandered innocently towards the offices of his paper, which were close by. It was getting late. The first yelling of the imprisoned Daily boys was just beginning to rise on the autumn air. Suddenly Denry was accosted by a young man. "Hello, Machin!" cried the young man. "What have you shaved your beard off for? I scarcely knew you." "I just thought I would, Swetnam," said Denry, who was obviously discomposed. It was the youngest of the Swetnam boys. He and Denry had taken a sort of curt fancy to one another. "I say," said Swetnam confidentially, as if obeying a swift impulse, "I did hear that the Signal people meant to collar all your chaps this afternoon, and I believe they have done. Hear that now?" Swetnam's father was intimate with the Signal people. "I know," Denry replied. But I mean papers and all." "I know," said Denry. "Oh!" murmured Swetnam. "But I'll tell you a secret," Denry added. "They aren't to-day's papers. They're yesterday's and last week's and last month's. We've been collecting them specially and keeping them nice and new-looking." "Well, you're a caution," murmured Swetnam. "I am," Denry agreed. A number of men rushed at that instant with bundles of the genuine football edition from the offices of the Daily. "Come on!" Denry cried to them. "Come on! This way! Bye-bye, Swetnam!" And the whole file vanished round a corner. The yelling of imprisoned cheese-fed boys grew louder. 5. In the meantime, at the Signal office, which was not 300 yards away but on the other side of Crown Square, apprehension had deepened into anxiety as the minutes passed and the Snape circus procession persisted in not appearing on the horizon of the Oldcastle Road. The Signal would have telephoned to Snape's, but for the fact that a circus is never on the telephone. It then telephoned to its Oldcastle agent, who, after a long delay, was able to reply that the cavalcade had left Oldcastle at the appointed hour, with every sign of health and energy. Then the Signal sent forth scouts all down the Oldcastle Road to put spurs into the procession, and the scouts returned, having seen nothing. Pessimists glanced at the possibility of the whole procession having fallen into the canal at Cauldon Bridge. The paper was printed, the train parcels for Knype, Longshaw, Bursley and Turnhill were dispatched, The boys were waiting. The fingers of the clock in the publishing department were